All right. Hello and welcome everyone to another of the 2022 builds refreshes. Today we get to talk about GARA, who, based on the 2021 stats that they released, is a criminally underplayed Warframe. She's paired right next to Frost, obviously alphabetically, and they have about the same play rate, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, especially if you saw yesterday's video. Frost, not in a great state. GARA, doing pretty well in my opinion. So, I'm curious if you guys can tell me, why don't you play GARA? Because I don't get it. Is it just that you have another Warframe that's better, that does similar things? Like, what are we up to here that people aren't playing very much GARA? Because GARA is quite good. We're going to talk about a variety of ways to use her today. So, first and foremost, we are going to talk about just the super comfy build, just the really chill, like mega comfy mode build, and that is this. This is way over invested for being a mega comfy build, and we're going to talk about what the kind of min spec is here for just chilling out as GARA. Min spec is an aura, does not need to be steel charge. Brief respite, probably better. Steel charge is only if you're going to use a stat stick, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Stuff we'll go into in a moment. But steel charge is in here. We have prime sure-footed for not being knocked down. This is real nice and comfy. You can helmet on like Neja's 1 or any number of other things that make you immune to status. And that is going to give you a similar effect here, but just not being knocked down. Super nice. And then we're going to be using adaptation for that 90% DR, and that is going to combine with the 90% DR we're going to get from Splinter Storm to give us 99% DR, which makes us very, very hard to kill. And then the only other stuff that we need in terms of stats is Intensify, or 30% ability strength, however you want to get that. And then a chunk of duration and efficiency. You can go with just Streamline. You can go with Fleeting Streamline like I've done here. In terms of duration, you can go Continuity and Narrow-Minded, or one or the other, like go Narrow-Minded and no Fleeting. And there's a bunch of combinations therein that you can do, but basically you want duration and efficiency and at least 130% strength, and your range isn't going to matter very much for a comfy build. And this is going to allow you to just hang out in super high damage reduction, and the more strength you have, you're also going to be able to put damage vulnerability on enemies and protect yourself and also your allies, because Splinter Storm can go on objects that are allied with you and allies like Banshees and such that you might have in your party that might really appreciate the protection. But for defending targets, in all relevant content, which is to say, if you're going past wave 100 of defense, you're probably going to want something else. Splinter Storm makes it so that the defense target just can't die. Like, it's just not going to happen. And that's great. Fantastic for defense in that way. And of course, you can combine that with Massive Vitrify if you really feel like you need to in order to put a wall around that defense objective as well. And with those two things combined, it's pretty much going to be impossible for you to lose at defending things, which is great because it's also including yourself in terms of defending things. But the other thing that this build does, and the reason it's this build and is using like Augur Reach and stuff, which is very much not required, is because this build also is a funsies build. And the funsies are doing the infinite scaling of Splinter Storm to Touch of Death enemies. That is also why we have Pillage subsumed. So I have a good chunk of duration and a good chunk of strength, which makes it so Pillage strips an okay amount of armor, and also will give us a bunch of shields. Giving us a bunch of shields is great with the damage reduction we're going to be getting through adaptation and through Splinter Storm, as it's just a lot of health for enemies to have to try and chunk through. But the infinite damage combo, for those of you that don't know, is you turn your 2 on with GARA, and you get the little counter in the bottom. And you see it starts at 462 damage, which is basically nothing. Now, if you use your 4... you'll notice that your 2 gets refreshed whenever you use your 4, so you can keep that going for as long as you want. Whenever you use your 1 to break your 4 while you are standing outside of your 4, all of the damage of the explosion of your 4 will get added to your AoE around you, and that can continually stack up and up and up forever. This is the Touch of Death GARA little combo, and you can make it stack faster than this through certain means, that is to say your Rivens and such, but in general it's going to stack like about this fast. This is pretty much what you're going to see very normally. We'll show the stat stick in a moment, But basically, you can get this up to a bunch of damage, and it's a good way to spend your energy, and at least do that whenever you're refreshing your defenses of yourself and or your companion and or your teammates, because anyone that's touched by your 4 will also get this refresh. This amount of damage is really, really good in the regular star chart. It doesn't scale super well in the steel path, and that's why I've actually gotten pillage, is because if you remove almost 50% of the armor of the enemies, you only need to stack to about 1 million. And then that'll kill pretty much anything in the steel path. But even at like this level, which is like 250,000, which didn't take us very many casts at all things considered, these level 185 enemies are mostly really going to hate this. Of course, walked over to the enemies with the DR giving allies, but against the super heavy gunners, like level 185s, like, yeah, they're not gonna immediately die from just like 2.5 million damage, obviously. You can throw your 2 on them, but I prefer just to, you know, put the 3 on, and that really accelerates this in a pretty big way. And for heavies, you're really just gonna want to shoot heavies. Like, that's just the nature of the thing, is that you should probably just shoot the heavy units, but you can do whatever you want. Making this scale super, super high and touch affecting whole hallways of enemies is very funny. And it's just a good time. It's a good, janky, goofy build that you can do, even though normally you're usually just going to want to be using your weapons with your nigh unkillability. But it's fun. In terms of stat stick, the Fragor Prime is what I prefer here. You can use a few other things. You can use weapons that build up their status super fast. You can use like the Venka and get the damage multiplier that way. But the passive of the Fragor, just to start at 2x, I find to be pretty good. And then just, you know, throw a bunch of generic damage on here. As you can see, I have a ton of extra points, so this much forma is not even close to needed, and you're going to get very similar results, even if you don't have a Fragor Prime. Just with any weapon that you're going to throw a bunch of elementals and raw damage on, you're going to be just fine doing that. And I know this is labeled Korra stat stick, but that's old text, so don't worry about that. But yeah, that's what's going on with like comfy GARA. This is what I'm going to use in the Steel Path run, because this is more appropriate for Steel Path, just to have like the huge amounts of survivability, and then just like using guns and such. But I do really want to talk about these other 2 builds. Now, hybrid, I wouldn't super suggest, but AoE farm is very, very useful. If you're going to be doing big, like, mass kill farms on enemies, whether that's like on Hydron or a similar node that you're going to get a ton of resources for, where you're paired up with like some Necrosses and stuff, this build is extremely, extremely useful. I actually used this build to re-level my GARA on Hydron just to see how effective it would be, and the responses were very positive. It was an extremely positive response to this instantly wiping the map and making it so that we did not have to do anything. But let's talk about how this build works also. Obviously, this runs considerably less duration, so you're going to have to refresh your 2 more often, but that's just fine because we run a ton of range. Also, this build uses Roar, but you don't have to use Roar. You can, but it's by no means required. Roar is more for, like, if you scale a little higher than you maybe normally would, then you start using Roar in conjunction, and it's pretty much whatever. But in the regular star chart stuff, let's say the enemies are level 40 or so, or maybe 50, whatever. Say level 40. I want to pause the AI here just to have them up here. So normally the way you're using this is you use your 4 and then you have your 2 on and you walk outside of it and you hit 1 and you get all that damage. So the AoE that you're absorbing from your explosion off your 4 is a real AoE that does damage. And it's quite good at killing fodder and most heavier units that you're going to interact with at those regular star chart levels. And this explosion is as tall as the wall is, and it extends down quite fast. And this is about a 40-meter explosion out from the wall in all directions, which is huge and can clear entire tile sets. Now, there are downsides to this, and the main downside is that there's no explosion inward. There's no implosion. So any enemies inside of this will have to be dealt with personally, which is usually not a big deal. But having a absolutely outrageous outside AoE where everything on the map dies through walls is great, especially considering if you're on a tall tile set, you can simply jump. And then this huge AoE is going to explode out and cover just an absolutely colossal amount of the map. In fact, it is actually arguable that depending on what tile set you're farming, you want less range than this. I have not included Cunning Drift because it's actually too big for most tile sets and is just unnecessary because of that. So, depending on what you're farming, you're going to go from this like 39.75 explosion range, drop Auger Reach, and have this like 35 meter explosion range, but you're going to have a smaller circle at the center, so that it adjusts where you're using this AoE, essentially, to suit your needs for the farm. So yeah, this build, also not hard to put together, very notable. You do not need to run Prime Sure-Footed with this build. It is not necessary at all. You can very, very much skip Prime Sure-Footed. You don't need Umbral Intensify. You can use regular. Like, you can use not Auger Reach. This build's also quite malleable in terms of getting like a good farming setup. And also, very, very notable, whenever you don't include Prime Sure-Footed, Umbral Intensify, Auger Reach, a max Transient Fortitude, and this is just Intensify instead, or like Intensify and like maybe the Auger Strength mod, and just regular continuity, the build becomes colossally cheap. So if you're a new player, this is very, very good as a map wiping option, as long as you've gotten like the Broken War or some other weapon that you've leveled already that you can just throw a bunch of elemental damage into and get a good chunk of AoE that way. So really good for early game farming for newer players, and GARA is very accessible early game. So there's that. Now hybrid, there are a lot of better things that you can do than to utilize this hybrid build. This hybrid build is basically just for trash mob clearing on higher level Viscers. That's really honestly what this is for. It's got, 175 range instead of 265. It's only on 130 strength, and it's still using Sure-Footed and adaptation and stuff. And we've got more duration, and that's just to make this more comfortable so you can throw on your 2 and not have to spam your Mass Vitrify as much as you would with the AoE farm to keep your 2 up. And basically what this does is it's just for farming Viscers if you want to use GARA for that. Warframes like Titania are way, way better at that type of mission where you need to be moving very, very quickly through the map and AoEing it at the same time. But for any kind of a stationary farm where you're paired up with like a Necros or whatever for low-level stuff, this build works phenomenally well. With that, I mean, you guys have seen like the comfy build kill these enemies with like the gimmick and everything else. So enjoy the Steel Path run. I will see you guys tomorrow or tonight over on twitch.tv/Brozime. I am going to be playing the new Horizon Forbidden West. So come join me on stream for that, and I will hopefully see you there. Goodbye.
Scans show Grenier are harvesting Kuva nearby. Set off the alarms to draw them out, then steal their Kuva catalysts. Predictable. As expected, Grenier have shut down environmental systems, sending modified life support capsules. Use these to sustain your environment or attach Kuva catalysts to begin harvesting. Prepare for life support. I've delivered a life support capsule to the area. Activating it will buy you more time. Life support incoming. Another life support capsule is now available. The operative has just made their first discovery. Keep up the good work. Extraction is available if you need it. The longer you fight, the more successful we will be.